The war was finally over. The battle that had shaped the fate of entire civilizations had reached its brutal conclusion. Thrag, standing before Nolan and Mark, acknowledged their role in securing the survival of the Viltrumite race. With a tone that carried both gratitude and finality, he assured them that they would not hear from him again. It was a promise, or perhaps a warning, that marked the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. As Mark processed Thrag's words, Zack arrived, his timing almost surreal. Mark wasted no time in telling him the news. The Viltrumite war was over. The weight of those words hung in the air, yet there was little celebration. The two exchanged a glance before silently agreeing it was time to go home. They left the war behind, carrying its scars with them, both visible and unseen. Back on Earth, Debbie sat alone, her phone pressed against her ear. She was in the middle of a conversation with her boyfriend, Paul, but her mind was elsewhere. As he spoke, she realized that whatever connection they had was fading. The war had changed things, even for those not directly involved. In a moment of clarity, she decided to end the relationship. It wasn't fair to him, and it wasn't fair to herself. When she hung up, a strange emptiness settled over her, but it was soon interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Mark and Nolan had finally returned. The moment she saw her son, tears welled up in her eyes. 10 months. 10 long months without him. Without hesitation, she rushed into his arms, holding him tightly as sobs racked her body. It was a mix of joy and relief, an overwhelming moment of reunion. But then she pulled back slightly, scanning the room, her heart sinking when she noticed someone was missing. "Where's Oliver?" she asked, her voice trembling. Nolan, standing beside Mark, reassured her that Oliver was alive. He was safe and recovering on Telescria, though the battle had left its marks on him as well. The relief in Debbie's eyes was palpable, but it was short-lived as she noticed Nolan's expression shift when he turned to her. "Who's Paul?" Nolan asked, his voice neutral but pointed. Debbie stiffened. She shot a quick glance at Mark, then at Nolan, before firmly telling her son to go see Eve. Mark hesitated, but understood that this was a conversation not meant for him. As he left, Nolan pressed for answers, and Debbie, already emotionally raw, let her frustration surface. She didn't shy away from the truth. Yes, she had moved on. With Mark gone, she had been alone, and Paul had been there for her. But now, seeing Nolan again had stirred up emotions she wasn't ready to confront. She knew Nolan had every reason to be upset, but so did she. Their past was complicated, and despite everything, the feelings between them hadn't faded. Before their conversation could go any further, a sudden burst of energy filled the room. Cecil emerged from his teleporter, gun already raised, and without hesitation, he fired at Nolan. The shot struck true, but Nolan barely flinched. Instead of reacting with violence, he simply stared at Cecil, who lowered his weapon almost immediately. "Sorry," Cecil muttered. "Mark told me you changed." His apology was as blunt as his attack, but Nolan didn't respond. Instead, Cecil shifted focus, needing confirmation. Was it really over? Had the war actually ended? Mark had told him, but hearing it from Nolan made it feel real. The weight of it settled in, but there was no time to process it. Meanwhile, Mark made his way to Eve's house. The moment she saw him standing in the doorway, all the emotions she had suppressed over the months came rushing to the surface. She didn't hold back. Tears streamed down her face as she threw herself into his arms, clinging to him as though afraid he would disappear again. He noticed the changes in her, the slight weight gain, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was that they were together again. Elsewhere, at the Pentagon, Cecil returned to his office. He let out a deep sigh as he addressed DA Sinclair. The war was over. All the Reanimen that had been prepared, including the monstrous Invincible Reanimen, were no longer needed. Sinclair nodded, but neither of them looked relieved. Zack arrived home only to find his neighbors waiting for him with news. His father was at the space station. The two had spent months apart, but in that moment, they acknowledged the changes in each other. They both had beards now, a minor detail, but a reminder of how much time had passed. Eve updated Mark on everything that had happened while he was gone. She had managed to keep Invincible Inc. running with the help of Bulletproof. Her powers were back to normal, and she had saved money to buy land, but she hadn't gone through with it. She hadn't been able to, not while Mark was gone. As she spoke, the fear of losing him became too much, and she broke down again. In a quiet voice, she asked if he had been in a coma, a thought that had haunted her for months. Nolan and Debbie continued their conversation. Debbie confessed that seeing him again had changed things. Being with Paul had never felt the same. Nolan admitted that he missed her, reaching for her hand. For a brief moment, they allowed themselves to relive what they once had. But as she pulled away, Nolan pressed forward. He argued that centuries of belief weren't easily overcome. Debbie, overwhelmed with frustration, snapped back. She wished things could go back to the way they were. But Nolan shook his head. They couldn't. He wouldn't lie again. Eve later visited William, catching up as Rick left for work. William probed, asking if she had told Mark something. She admitted she hadn't. Not yet. She wasn't sure how. Meanwhile, Mark soared through the sky, lost in thought. The war was over, but it didn't feel like victory. Too much had been lost. At the Coalition of Planets headquarters in Telescria, Alan received a transmission. The message was from Thetis, a final contingency plan in case of his death. The words carried a grim warning. If the war effort had failed, Alan was to forget his alliances with the Viltrumites and wipe them out completely. The Scourge virus was the key. It was a last resort, an irreversible step that would determine the fate of the universe. As Alan processed the message, the weight of his responsibility became clear. The war may have ended, but the consequences were far from over. And that's where we'll leave it for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this breakdown of Invincible, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into your favorite comics. Let me know in the comments what you thought about this chapter and what you're excited to see next. See you in the next video.